Hey guys, tonight we're trotting back through time, on horseback, no less, across dusty roads, moonlit plains, and the occasional completely necessary goat detour. You're not wearing armor. You're not a soldier. You are, however, part of one of the most quietly astonishing feats of ancient engineering, a postal system that stretched across an empire so vast, it could eat several countries for breakfast and still have room for dessert. This is the story of the Achaemenid courier service, the world's first express network. And no, you probably won't survive this, mostly because you'll either fall asleep before the end of your first ride or you'll forget which satchel had the king's orders and which one had your dried figs. Rookie mistake. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly satisfying watching the map fill in with sleepy history fans. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a stretch of road that feels like it shouldn't exist. Perfectly packed dirt, carved clean across mountains, rivers, and wastelands. There's a milestone to your right, etched with symbols that tell you this isn't just a local track for wayward sheep. This is the Royal Road, the Achaemenid Empire's main artery. You adjust the satchel slung over your shoulder, check your horse's bridle, still slightly crooked, and squint toward the horizon. Your mission? Simple. Deliver a message from Sardis in western Anatolia all the way to Susa, one of Persia's gleaming capitals. Just over 2,700 kilometers. No pressure. This road is older than your nerves. It was built during the reign of Darius I, the same guy who stamped his name on canal walls, stone inscriptions, and probably his toothbrush. He didn't just want an empire, he wanted one that communicated swiftly, accurately, and impressively. Mainstream historians agree that the Achaemenid courier network was astonishing for its time. It operated with regular stations, fresh horses, and riders trained to keep going, neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night, a phrase so catchy that it eventually became a postal slogan a couple millennia later. And here you are. One of them. A royal messenger. Officially unarmed but carrying the weight of the king's voice in your scroll pouch. Your route today will take you across hills and flatlands, past farms, markets, and temples. But you're not stopping. Not unless it's a designated station, called a chuparkhana, an official postal house spaced about a day's ride apart, where fresh horses and snacks await. If you're lucky, maybe someone's made lentil stew. If not, it's stale barley and whatever your saddlebag hasn't sat on for too long. The scrolls you carry are sealed with clay stamps, each bearing the mark of the satrap who issued them. Tampering with one would be like opening a presidential email with a smiley face and forwarding it to your aunt. Bad form. Worse consequences. But it's not just orders you carry. Sometimes it's news. Tax reports. Spy updates. Occasionally, a simple invitation to tea, though worded like a command. You ride in silence, save for the hoofbeats and the creak of your gear. The landscape unfolds like a scroll, villages painted in ochre and smoke, sheep filing across ridges like clouds with legs, desert sands rippling like parchment left too long in the sun. And you're not alone. You pass another courier coming from the opposite direction, nodding as you exchange nothing but dust and mutual understanding. He looks tired. You probably do too. But there's pride in this job. You are the connective tissue of the empire. You are the whisper that binds the capital to the corners. You are, in the most literal sense, the line of communication. You ride on, the horizon always just out of reach, the road ahead as long and as loyal as the empire that built it. You're back in the saddle, figuratively and literally. The horse beneath you huffs a warm breath that curls into the morning air like a polite complaint. The sun's just rising, brushing gold across the packed dirt road, and the leather reins are already beginning to stick to your palms. This is the life of a Persian relay rider, or chapar, if you want to impress people at dinner parties. You lean forward slightly, urging the horse into a steady trot. The beast knows the rhythm better than you do. This isn't a wild gallop across battlefields, this is measured urgency, fast enough to impress, careful enough to preserve your spine and your message. The system works like this: you, the rider, cover a distance between two stations. When you reach one, you hand your message to the next chapar, or swap mounts if you're continuing. It's an elegant relay, miles long and empire wide, with each leg measured for maximum efficiency. Mainstream accounts place these stations roughly every 25 to 30 kilometers. Why? Because that's about how far a fast horse can travel without beginning to resent its life choices. And when you've got messages traveling up to 2,700 kilometers, you need a few well-timed refreshes. You pull into the first relay station just after midday. It's nothing glamorous, just a squat building of sun-bleached stone with a shaded stable, a well, and a fire pit where something that might be stew simmers in a blackened pot. The station master waves as if he saw you yesterday. Which, to be fair, he might have. You drop from the saddle, legs stiff, and hand over your message scroll. A fresh chapar mounts up and rides off in a cloud of dust that smells vaguely of horse and ambition. You sit down on a low bench. A kid brings you water, and you drink like it's the best thing you've ever tasted. It probably is. You're not done for the day, though. The route loops. Some riders only go one leg. Others circle back, carry responses, or redirect couriers who've gone missing, or just got distracted by particularly persuasive pomegranate vendors. The post is constant. The king's reach, uninterrupted. Fringe records mention riders who developed a sixth sense for impending messages, claiming they could smell urgency on the wind. Others say chapars could identify a scroll source by the weight of the clay seal alone. Whether myth or muscle memory, you're starting to believe it. By late afternoon, you're on the road again. The heat has peaked, and the air wobbles on the horizon. Your horse is new, fresh, and annoyingly enthusiastic. It trots with the gait of someone trying to impress a date on their first ride. The terrain shifts around you, open plains giving way to rocky outcrops, the road still holding steady like a ribbon tied across the empire's waist. Somewhere, far ahead, another rider waits with the next message. Behind you, the previous station disappears into haze. You feel the weight of what you carry, not just the scroll, but the connection. Every message that arrives on time reinforces the empire's structure. Every rider is a stitch in the imperial quilt. And as the sun lowers and shadows stretch long across the road, you can almost hear it, the whisper of hooves, the crackle of parchment, and the voice of a king carried not in thunder, but in trot. By dawn, you're already riding again, saddle creaking beneath you, and the world ahead unfolding like a map inked with dust and sunstroke. But now it's time to really appreciate the royal road, not just the ride, but the bones of the empire beneath your boots. This was no ordinary path carved out by shepherds and chance. This was deliberate. Crafted. A state project on a scale most modern highway systems would tip their helmets to. Stretching from Sardis in the west, near modern Turkey, to Susa in the heart of Persia, the royal road was over 2,700 kilometers long. That's about the same distance as walking from Paris to Moscow, with fewer pastry options. You pass one of the milestones, worn smooth but still legible, marking distance and sometimes the local satrap's name. These weren't for show. They were vital for coordination. Even empires get lost without decent signage. The road surface itself is a mix of compacted gravel, pounded earth, and in some segments, especially near big cities, stone slabs. You bounce a little as you ride over them, your teeth quietly protesting every historical bump. But it's still better than wilderness. Mainstream sources tell us this was Darius I's pet project. He inherited a chaotic sprawl of paths and regional trade tracks. What he wanted was unity. Something that would make his rule feel connected, coherent. One thread tying his empire together, not just for merchants and armies, but for ideas. You crest a ridge and see it stretch below you. The road snakes through a valley, disappearing into the blur of heat and horizon. Waystations dot the path at intervals, little square specks barely bigger than sheep. But they're there. Reliable. Ready. You pass through several such places over the course of the day. Each is unique. One is built into the side of a hill, shaded by palm fronds and filled with birds who do not respect quiet hours. Another is more formal, with guards who inspect your seals with a level of intensity usually reserved for suspiciously large bananas. At each station, horses are swapped, scrolls double-checked, and riders offered food, water, and something resembling rest. There's no loitering. This is a relay, not a vacation. Somewhere around mid-morning, you stop by a small shrine built into the road's edge. It's dedicated to Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god of light and wisdom. You toss a pebble onto the offering pile and mutter a wish, not for victory, not even for glory, just for fewer saddle sores. Fringe stories say some riders carried small charms, feathers, polished stones, even teeth from a previous horse. You try not to think about it. Not for luck, exactly, but for continuity. A reminder that they're part of a chain stretching across time and terrain. You pass merchants, too. Caravans piled with textiles, dates, copper pots. They tip their heads as you ride by, sometimes slipping you snacks in exchange for news from upriver. You're not supposed to chat. But rules bend when dates are involved. And always, the road keeps going. It passes through forests, cuts along rivers, scales ridges so steep you wonder how anyone ever got a message through without swearing profusely. But that's the genius. The Royal Road wasn't just built for terrain, it was built through it. Historians still argue whether sections were repaved or just maintained as needed. But one thing's certain, it worked. Messages that once took months now arrived in days. An empire that stretched across 3 continents could speak to itself without shouting. As you ride into the evening, the sun paints the road in gold and shadow. You realize something simple but grand. You're not just traveling the Royal Road. The next station appears like a mirage, low walls, a squat stable, and a clay chimney gently exhaling the scent of lentils, old saddles, and something that could either be stew or an ambitious goat. You dismount with a groan and stretch your legs, which now bend at odd angles you don't remember authorizing. Welcome to the post hut, the humble linchpin of the Persian courier system. Officially, it's called a chuparkhana, which sounds a bit like a sneeze but is actually where the magic happens, if your idea of magic includes saddle sores, papyrus, and a horse with an attitude problem. Each station is spaced about a day's ride apart, or less, if the route is tough. There are hundreds of these peppered along the Royal Road. Some are simple, just a roof, a water trough, a place to leave a scroll. Others are more deluxe, with multiple stables, bunks, and a kitchen that might accidentally set your eyebrows on fire. You're greeted by the station master, a round, sunburned man who gestures for your satchel before you even say hello. He takes his job seriously. The postal relay isn't just about speed, it's about precision. Riders don't loiter. Scrolls don't sit idle. The Empire doesn't like delays. You hand over the message pouch and watch as a new chapar mounts up, the scroll transferred like a relay baton, and within minutes, he's gone. Just like that. No trumpet fanfare. No dramatic music. Just dust and hooves. While the next rider disappears over the horizon, you collapse onto a reed mat under a canopy. Someone hands you a bowl of lentil stew, salty, steaming, and inexplicably soothing. You eat it slowly, savoring the warmth even as your joints protest in Morse code. The stable boy swaps your horse's tack and wipes it down. Another lad brushes sand off your boots, humming a tune about a rider who once mistook a tax scroll for a shopping list and caused a week-long bread crisis. You peek into the supply room. Scrolls are stored here, sealed and sorted by satrapy. There's even a cubby marked, sensitive, do not drop. You make a mental note never to touch that one. Mainstream historians confirm that these stations weren't just refueling points, they were data hubs. Riders were debriefed, reports were filed, and horses were tracked with near-bureaucratic zeal. Some stations kept backup riders in case of injury, illness, or unexpected invasions. Because yes, sometimes, an army would arrive before the mail. And these places were social spots, too. Imagine being the guy who hears the latest news from every corner of the empire, from Babylon to Bactria. Station masters were like postal DJs, spinning the scrolls and remixing the gossip. Fringe accounts even mention one post hut that became a semi-official matchmaking service, because, and I quote, "Nothing bonds two people faster than watching each other eat stew at sunset." As the night deepens, someone sets out bowls of roasted chickpeas and dried figs. You sit by the fire with other chapars, comparing boot blisters and horse names. One swears his mount understands sarcasm. Another says he delivered a scroll that simply read, "Bring sandals." And still, the road calls. Even here, with your belly full and your limbs turning into soft bread, you know you'll be back in the saddle at dawn. The message may have moved on, but you, part of this living chain, have more to carry, more to connect. The stars overhead are endless, but the road feels longer still. And in this small, smoky post hut, you rest. Just long enough to remember why you ride. The next message feels heavier, though it's just another scroll sealed with the satrap's mark, a coiled lion stamped into clay. You tuck it carefully into your pouch and swing into the saddle with a grunt that sounds entirely unheroic. This leg of the journey is flatter, but the heat rises early, curling off the road like a warning. Still, you ride. Because now you're thinking not just about the path, or the horses, or the stew, but about what you're actually carrying. What made this entire empire go to such great lengths to create a network just for words? The answer lies in the contents of your satchel. Messages, yes. Orders. Decrees. Tax reports. But also poems. Invitations. Congratulations. Warnings. Instructions to build or to stop building. And sometimes, something a little more curious, symbols. Some messages didn't include text at all. Instead, they contained objects. A broken arrowhead might signal war. A sprig of basil could represent peace or lunch, depending on who received it. One letter consisted of nothing more than a single black feather, which historians still argue whether it meant betrayal, speed, or that someone's bird got involved by accident. Mainstream accounts describe a surprising variety of materials used in royal correspondence. Scrolls on parchment or papyrus. Clay tablets. Wooden tablets coated in wax that could be inscribed, smoothed, and reused, ancient post-its, basically. Security was everything. Each message was sealed, physically, symbolically, and sometimes spiritually. Satraps used personalized stamps. High-ranking messages might be wrapped in dyed cloth or knotted cords, signaling urgency or confidentiality. Some seals were so complex, a rider could identify the sender just by touch. And you? You're trained not to ask. But you're also human. And sometimes, when the road is long and the sun is loud, you wonder. One chupar told you he once carried a scroll that hummed. Another swore she saw hers change color when a thunderstorm approached. Fringe tales? Absolutely. But plausible enough to make you check your pouch twice. You pass a lone traveler, walking with a limp and a basket of dates. He tips his head respectfully. News from the east, he asks. You don't answer. You can't. The rules are clear, a message unopened is a message intact. The trust of the empire rides with you. And while the king might never meet you, his orders must arrive like they were whispered from his lips. You spot a shadow on the road ahead, another rider, approaching fast. As you draw closer, you see his pouch hanging slightly open, scrolls jostling with every trot. You signal. He reins in. I'm going west, he says. Relay broke near Arbela. You? East, you reply. He pulls a scroll from his pouch and offers it. Can you take this one? It's light. But important. You glance at the seal. It's not your satrap's. Not your region. But the mark is clear, official. Needed. You take it. The network breathes like this, flexible, responsive, human. When roads break, riders adjust. When stations fall, others rise. Messages never stop. Mainstream historians agree the Persian system was as much about trust as it was about speed. Riders weren't just couriers. They were guardians. And the idea that a message could cross continents and arrive unaltered was as revolutionary then as it is now. You tuck the extra scroll beside the other, shift in the saddle, and ride on. Not because the message is yours. But because the message matters. The message you carry isn't just traveling the road, it's traveling through layers of eyes, ears, and softly rustling robes. Because in the Achaemenid Empire, postal couriers weren't merely messengers. They were part of something even more intricate. Something observant. They were the king's eyes and ears. It sounds dramatic. Maybe even a little theatrical. But in practice, it meant one simple thing: riders reported what they saw. Not in gossipy whispers, but in structured, expected updates that moved up the ladder just as efficiently as any scroll. You ride into the next post station near dusk. It's a larger one, 2 stories, with a walled courtyard and a cat who clearly owns the place. As you dismount, a clerk approaches, papyrus in hand. Any disturbances, he asks. Not, how's the road, or, do you want water? He's recording data. You describe a broken bridge 3 days back. A strange fire near a grain silo. A caravan that seemed far too well armed for casual trading. He nods, jotting notes, not even blinking when you mention the humming scroll from the previous rider. This isn't idle curiosity. It's surveillance, ancient style. The Persian court relied heavily on reports not just from governors and tax collectors, but from the post system itself. Riders saw everything. Riders remembered. Mainstream accounts refer to these operatives as the king's watchers, a term that conjures a secret order of desert ninjas. In truth, they were often just couriers who knew when to write things down and who to pass the scroll to. Fringe theories suggest that some riders carried 2 scrolls, one public, one secret. The second, disguised or encrypted, went directly to a royal investigator. Some say it was tucked inside a hollow saddle post. Others claim it was sewn into the hem of a cloak, though that sounds wildly itchy. You sip water under the eaves while the station clerk reviews his records. A bored-looking scribe copies your observations onto a fresh tablet. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. These notes are compiled and sent to regional satraps. And if anything seems off, it goes higher. All the way to the king. Imagine that. A fire in a field, seen by a single rider, could end up on a scroll in Persepolis within a week. Reviewed. Cross-referenced. Acted upon. The empire breathed through these lines of sight. And it wasn't just danger that got flagged. Signs of unrest. Price fluctuations. Unusual trade patterns. Even cultural tensions. You pass through one village where the local shrine is being rebuilt with suspiciously elaborate stonework. You note it. Another stop, another scroll passed to you without fanfare. It's marked with the eye symbol, the unofficial seal of the king's internal watchers. You're not supposed to know what that means. But everyone does. You ride a little straighter with that scroll tucked close. And you keep your eyes a little wider. Every checkpoint becomes a page. Every face, a potential footnote. Historians still debate how centralized this network was. Some argue it was tightly controlled from the top. Others believe it was more regional, with satraps developing their own layers of watchfulness. Either way, the information flowed. Not just along the roads, but up and inward, toward the palace. Toward the one man who wanted to see everything without having to leave his chair. And so you ride, eyes open, mouth shut. You are a rider. You are a courier. But today, you are also watching. You wake before dawn, a scroll already waiting by your saddle and the air holding that fleeting crispness only known to those who rise when owls still argue with moonlight. You mount quietly, your horse barely blinking, and ride on toward the next horizon. This leg of your journey feels organized. Purposeful. Like the road itself was written before the land was even finished. Because in many ways, it was. Welcome to the era of Darius I, a man whose hobbies included building empires, engraving cliffs, and reinventing the concept of long-distance communication. If anyone deserves the title, Mailman King, it's this guy. Darius didn't just inherit a vast kingdom, he molded it, mapped it, and made it manageable. Before him, Persia's road system was a bit like your uncle's attic, full of things, poorly labeled, and with dubious structural integrity. But Darius? He formalized it all. He codified distances. Established postal routes. Built stations. Appointed officials. Made sure that, in his words, nothing could stop the message. Okay, he didn't say it like that exactly, but Herodotus thought highly enough of the Persian postal system to describe it as one where neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night delayed the couriers, a quote future postal services would steal with zero shame. You pass under one of the royal stelae, stone markers that line sections of the road with inscriptions from Darius himself. They're written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. He wanted everyone to understand that this road, this message, this empire, was designed to endure. Mainstream historians agree that under Darius, the system reached its zenith. The network wasn't just for kings and satraps anymore. It became infrastructure, accessible, regulated, and sacred in its efficiency. There's a scroll in your pouch now bearing Darius' seal, a stylized bowman with a crown of sharp angles. You feel its weight not in grams, but in implication. It might be a tax order. A border instruction. A shipment authorization for 300 jars of lentils. It doesn't matter. It carries the king's word. And the king's word rides faster than most people's thoughts. Fringe stories say Darius once disguised himself as a courier to test the system's speed. Others claim he had a favorite horse that could deliver a message 20% faster if given dates soaked in rosewater. Both are probably nonsense. But they reflect the reverence people had for the network, and the man who shaped it. You pass a small town where children race each other pretending to be chupars. One has a makeshift satchel. Another carries a scroll made from reeds tied with twine. They shriek with joy and fall over dramatically when caught by bandits, a game that, given Persia's size, was probably less fictional than they think. The local elder watches with a smile, then turns to you. Darius built us a path to each other, he says, and dared us to use it. You ride on, a little prouder. Because this isn't just a job. It's a thread in a vision that's lasted centuries. Darius wanted communication faster than conquest, orders swifter than rebellion, news ahead of rumor. And so, under the heat of an empire and the stars of an old king's dream, you ride. Still delivering. Still connecting. Still building the empire one scroll at a time. The terrain shifts under your horse's hooves like a slow-moving tapestry. What was once flat road turns gritty and steep, and before you know it, you're riding through foothills that smell of dust, salt, and old ambition. This leg of the journey? Less about the message, more about surviving the land itself. Because while the Royal Road is famous for its scale, what's often forgotten is that it crossed everything: deserts that could cook your sandals mid-step, snowy passes that bit your face like a jealous mountain goat, and open plains where wind was the only voice for miles. This morning, you're climbing. The road narrows. The rocks grow taller, grayer, and less interested in letting you pass. Your horse, bless its desert-born stubbornness, keeps moving with that slow, sure-footed clomp that says, "I've done worse." The Achaemenid Empire didn't shy away from difficult terrain. It didn't go around the problem. It engineered through it. Mountain passes were widened. Bridges were built over rivers with logs lashed so tightly they could hold an ox cart mid-rant. Even marshes were tamed with stone causeways that still peek out when the water's low. Mainstream records praise the Persian knack for terrain adaptation. Darius and his engineers weren't trying to impress, they were solving problems. How do we get a message from Babylon to Ecbatana in 6 days without losing a rider or a shoe? The answer: strategic roadwork and relentless ambition. You stop at a small rest point carved into the cliffside. It's little more than a stone ledge with a rain catchment jar and a lopsided bench, but it feels like a 5-star oasis. You sit, sip tepid water, and listen to the wind. Somewhere above, a hawk cries. Somewhere below, a goat bell jingles the empire's answer to Spotify. Fringe accounts claim that some riders trained their horses to navigate specific routes blindfolded. Especially useful during sandstorms in the Dasht-e Kavr, where you couldn't see your own nose, let alone the next milestone. You believe it. Riding through those deserts is like being inside a baking tray made of mirrors. You once delivered a scroll there wrapped in wet cloth to keep it from crumbling mid-journey. The rider before you claimed his eyebrows never grew back. And yet, the messages still moved. You descend the mountain later that afternoon, the road zigzagging like a bored snake. Below you stretches a salt plain so bright, it stings your eyes. You wrap your scarf tighter, leave your horse a moment to breathe, and walk a few steps just to hear the salt crunch underfoot. Some sections of the Royal Road were seasonal. Too snowy in winter. Too flooded in spring. In those times, messages were rerouted, not cancelled. Riders knew alternate tracks, hidden valleys, even goat paths that snuck messages through with barely a whisper. You pass a way station half buried in sand, its roof caved, its well choked with windblown memory. Yet the old road curves around it still. The Empire remembers. Even when the walls forget. You mount again, adjusting the scroll pouch now slightly damp with sweat, and press forward into terrain that dares you to stop. But you don't. Because the message matters. Because the Empire never told you it would be easy. Just possible. You ride into the next valley as the sun slips behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the road like ink dripped from an impatient scribe. It's quiet here, too quiet for a message that's supposed to move like wind. But not all messages were made of words. Tonight's delivery is different. No scroll. No seal. Just a small bundle wrapped in deep blue linen, tied with a red cord. You don't know what's inside. You're not meant to. But when the station keeper handed it over, he said something strange. Deliver this directly. No stops. No questions. You're used to that kind of instruction. The postal system of the Achaemenid Empire wasn't only about written communication. Sometimes, the message was the object. A token. A signal. A thing that meant something far beyond its physical form. You hold it in your lap as your horse trots forward, and for a while, you wonder, is it food? A jewel? A piece of cloth from a sacred fire temple? Or maybe something more symbolic. An abject message, a silent telegram meant to be understood by sight, not sound. Fringe tales speak of bundles like this, handkerchiefs soaked in specific oils, feathers from rare birds, even pomegranate seeds arranged in coded patterns. One famous case told of a satrap who received a single shoe in a silk bag. He understood instantly, his presence was required on the road. Fast. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Some think it was limited to royal houses. Others believe it extended to provincial lords, merchants, and even lovers, early emoji, carried by dusty horses. Tonight, you stop in a village just long enough to water your horse. No conversation. The bundle stays close, tied to your saddlehorn like a silent chaperone. You think about what it might mean. Maybe it's a truce token, two rival families agreeing to stop fighting long enough to share a wedding. Maybe it's a death notice. Or an invitation. Or a demand. But the beauty of it is this, you don't need to know. Your job isn't to interpret. It's to carry. You pass an old shepherd leading a flock across the road. He nods, then points to the horizon. They're waiting, he says. They always are. And you understand. In this world, words are powerful. But symbols? They travel deeper. They speak to people who've run out of language. Who need meaning without explanation. You think back to earlier deliveries. A broken arrowhead. A scorched piece of cloth. A stone carved into the shape of an open hand. Each one carried with the same urgency as the king's edicts. Each one delivered like it mattered more than your meals, your sleep, even your safety. The road narrows again as you approach the next relay. It's nearly invisible in the dark, just a flicker of lantern light and the faint outline of a stable. You dismount and hand the bundle directly to the next rider, who nods without a word. He tucks it into his satchel like it's made of glass, mounts up, and disappears into the night. And that's that. The message, whatever it was, is moving again. Because in this empire, communication doesn't always mean talking. Sometimes, it means showing up. Sometimes, it means being the silence between meanings. You're deep in the flatlands now, the road stretching endlessly ahead like a line drawn by a god with excellent penmanship. Your horse's gait is steady, the saddle finally broken in enough that you're no longer counting bruises like blessings. And the scroll in your pouch? It's headed to a place you've never seen, but someone else once did. Someone Greek. Because here's the twist, Persia's postal system didn't just impress its own empire. It impressed the neighbors, too. Even if they were sometimes mortal enemies. The Greeks, for all their drama and democracy, couldn't help but admire the system Persia had built. Herodotus himself, a man not known for understatement, called the Achaemenid post the fastest thing under the sun. He probably meant it figuratively, but with these horses? Maybe not. Mainstream historians agree that parts of the Persian system were observed, copied, or at least envied by other ancient civilizations. The Greeks tried implementing courier systems for battlefield messages and diplomacy, but they never matched the scale or polish of Darius's machine. Even the Romans, champions of roads and bureaucracy, developed their cursus publicus, state mail system, centuries later, borrowing elements from Persia's design. Way stations, fresh mounts, route logs, all concepts Persia used when Rome was still figuring out how to wear a proper toga. You ride past a marker stone with both Old Persian and Greek carved into it. A bilingual reminder that influence traveled just as efficiently as scrolls. Whether through conquest, alliance, or pure admiration, Persia's road network made an impression that outlasted its own empire. Fringe theories suggest Alexander the Great didn't just conquer Persia to defeat an enemy, he wanted the infrastructure. They say one of his first moves post-conquest was to seize the relay stations and assign Greek riders to Persian-trained horses. You arrive at a station where the stable boy greets you in a heavy Ionian accent. "Scroll?" he asks, hand outstretched. You blink. "Greek?" He grins. "Learned it from an old chapar who married my aunt." The empire's legacy lingers in these places. The method continues, even if the flag above the door has changed a few times. As you rest in the courtyard, sipping goat milk that tastes suspiciously like disappointment, you remember a story an old writer once told, of a Greek diplomat who thought he could ride the royal road himself, without stopping. He lasted 3 days before begging for sandals, a nap, and the removal of several splinters. You chuckle quietly. It's easy to admire from a distance. Much harder when you're the one with dust in your teeth and a horse that judges your posture. Still, the Greeks weren't wrong to be impressed. You remount as the stars rise again, cool wind brushing against your cheeks like approval from ancient critics. The road glows faintly in moonlight. Another rider passes by, humming a tune that sounds vaguely Mediterranean. You nod at each other. The system continues. Across language. Across borders. Because greatness doesn't just conquer. It communicates. By the time you reach the next station, the moon is sliding down the sky like it's trying not to wake anyone. You've been riding for what feels like forever, which is exactly how long some messages used to take, until Persia changed everything. Because now, it's time to talk about speed. Not blistering, lightning, magical sandhorse speed. But efficiency. Cold, calculated, incredibly boring on paper, but still astonishing, efficiency. Let's do some numbers. The distance from Sardis to Susa, the full stretch of the Royal Road, was roughly 2,700 kilometers. With the relay system in place, couriers could cover it in about 7 to 9 days. That's not a typo. That's a message moving across nearly an entire empire in just over a week. In sandals. Mainstream estimates say the average pace was about 250 to 300 kilometers per day, thanks to the constant swapping of fresh horses, well-marked stations, and a complete lack of unnecessary chatting. A normal traveler? 2 to 3 months on the same route. A Persian courier? 1 week, give or take a sandstorm. You stretch your legs and swap scrolls with a rider heading west. She looks exhausted but proud. 11 days from Bactra to Babylon, she says, munching on a figure. New personal best. Horse hated it. That's the magic of the Persian postal system, it was the slowest fast system ever. Not instantaneous. Not magical. But consistent, dependable, and practically revolutionary for its time. Fringe records describe experimental, fast-track scrolls, messages marked with symbols that prioritize them at stations, sometimes even waking sleeping chupars to ride at night. The early version of urgent with all the same passive-aggressive energy. Some scrolls bore a red wax seal, indicating they were to skip the queue. Others came with incentives, a small pouch of silver attached, encouraging the next rider to really hustle. But the true brilliance wasn't in raw speed. It was in coordination. Each station logged when a scroll arrived, when it left, who carried it, and what route it took. It said that some records from the Achaemenid postal service were so precise, you could calculate a message's location to within a few hours, if you trusted your math and the horses didn't get moody. You glance at the station ledger before mounting again. A simple clay tablet. Names. Times. Destinations. One scroll's journey mapped like a game of connect the dots for adults with authority issues. As you ride out, the landscape is shifting again, low grasslands giving way to thorny shrubs, the smell of dry sage in the air. The wind picks up. Your horse doesn't mind. It knows this route better than you know your dreams. And as you trot beneath another milestone, the inscription reads: Messages are breath. Without them, the empire does not speak. You smile. Because while this ride has been long, and your knees may never forgive you, you now understand something deeply, quietly impressive. The Persian postal system didn't try to break the laws of time. It simply respected it. And made the most of every dusty, galloping moment. The sun peeks up again like it's trying to catch you off guard, casting long shadows from the distant trees as you coast into another post hut, this one tucked between two lazy hills. You're sore, you're dusty, and your mouth tastes faintly like saddle leather and regret. But here's the secret you've been waiting for: the system wasn't just made of roads and horses and scrolls. It was made of people. Today, you're meeting the unsung backbone of the Persian postal machine, the support staff. The station keepers. The horse tenders. The scroll trackers. The local kids who ran messages within towns. Even the people who made the satchels and stirred the stew. You dismount into the courtyard and are immediately greeted by a pair of stable boys, one holding a curry comb, the other holding a chunk of honeyed barley cake. You hand over your reins and thank them with a nod and a coin. Post riders don't tip often, but today you're feeling generous. The station keeper, an older man with eyebrows like thunderclouds, shows you the logs. For scrolls today, 2 outbound, 1 marked for Babylon with a double seal. That one travels tonight, he mutters. High priority. You ask if you can rest for a bit. He gestures toward the shade where a scribe is already unrolling a fresh papyrus scroll and dipping his pen. He's copying one message for archiving. Yes, even 2,500 years ago, bureaucrats loved backups. Mainstream accounts confirm that Persian postal hubs often had dedicated scribes, cooks, blacksmiths, and inventory managers. Some stations even kept spare boots and medical supplies for injured riders. Think of it as the ancient world's combination of a DMV, FedEx warehouse, and roadside inn, with slightly more goats. One woman, the cook, waves you over and presses a bowl of lentil and lamb stew into your hands. Eat, she says. You look like someone who argued with a satrap and lost. You sit, grateful, and finally take a moment to observe everything happening around you. One young lad is refitting a stirrup. Another is drawing water from a deep well while his brother oils saddles. An elderly woman, possibly the station master's mother, paces along the wall, muttering prayers over each departing rider. Fringe sources even tell of post hut mascots, dogs or birds trained to recognize specific riders. One hut near Sogdiana allegedly had a falcon who only screeched when a scroll from the king arrived. Another, less nobly, kept a goat named Commander, who headbutted anyone who misfiled the logs. You stand and stretch. The station master appears again, holding out a fresh pouch. It's marked with a green thread, low priority, routine delivery, but still needed. Always needed. You ask him how long he's worked here. Since the fourth king, he says without blinking. Or maybe the third. Depends if you count the one who lasted less than a winter. He walks you to your horse, double-checks your saddle, and hands you a small cloth packet. Inside, dates and dried figs. Not from the Empire, he says with a wink. From me. And that's the truth at the heart of it. The Empire ran on riders. But it rested on its people. The ones who didn't gallop, but who kept the system alive with ink, sweat, and the occasional sarcastic goat. You mount up and wave farewell as the post hut disappears behind a curtain of morning dust. Another scroll. Another road. But now, carried on the backs of more than just you. The sky has shifted again, clouds rolling in from the northwest, pale and slow like ancient gossip. Your horse snorts at them suspiciously, and you pat its neck. Don't worry, you whisper. We've ridden through worse. Because let's be honest, not every scroll made it to its destination. Even in the Great Persian Machine, sometimes things went wrong. And tonight, you ride straight into a section known among couriers as the maybe zone. Not officially, of course. Maps still label it with names like Southeast Ridge or Upper Cuneiform Pass. But Chupars know the truth, this is where things go sideways. The terrain here is rocky and unpredictable. The road splits, forks, rejoins itself like a snake trying to remember its tail. The wind changes direction without warning. And the station here? Well, if it's still standing, it'll be the first good news of the evening. You ride cautiously, remembering stories shared over smoky lentil stew. The scroll that fell from a saddlebag and triggered a 3-month diplomatic delay. The rider who delivered the wrong message to the wrong satrap and accidentally started a chicken embargo. The post hut that burned down when someone stored scrolls too close to the brazier. Even now, mainstream records mention disruptions, bandit raids, flooding, disputes over territory, and, occasionally, total collapse of waypoints due to weather or rebellion. But the beauty of the system was its flexibility. Riders were trained to adapt. If a post hut was gone, they found the next. If a scroll was destroyed, they rode to the nearest scribe and dictated from memory. Some riders carried shorthand kits, scratched notes into clay tablets or bark in case of fire or theft. Backup plans weren't optional. They were procedure. You arrive at the maybe zone station just after dusk. It's there, barely. The walls lean like tired shoulders. The gate creaks as you pass. A single lantern burns inside. No one greets you, but there's stew on the fire and a cot with a note, "If I'm not back by dawn, take the scroll and ride east." You do as the note suggests, pour yourself a bowl, check the saddle, and inspect the message you're now responsible for. It's a heavy scroll. Wax-sealed, double-wrapped. It bears the insignia of a royal engineer, which means it's probably something exciting like dam measurements or aqueduct calculations. Still, it matters. You find the ledgers. Half-filled. Some entries smudged. Others crossed out. One simply reads, "Goat took the ink stick." Again. And you realize that even a perfectly built system must wrestle with chaos. It's not about perfection, it's about persistence. When roads collapse, messages detour. When riders fall, others mount up. The empire didn't rely on unbreakable rules, it relied on resilience. Fringe stories speak of phantom riders, chapars who vanished mid-route, only for their scrolls to show up weeks later in perfect condition, tied to the leg of a stray camel. There's even a tale of a scroll buried during a sandstorm, then found intact a year later and delivered anyway. No deadline too late for a determined postman. You rest your head for a moment on the saddlebag, the scroll safe beneath it, the stew cooling beside you. Outside, the wind howls softly. And somewhere out there, another rider is doing the same. Facing the unknown, trusting the road, and carrying on not because it's easy, but because someone is always waiting for the message. The next morning, you're back on the road with dust in your lashes and scrolls in your pack, because despite every disruption, despite goats, weather, and missing station masters, the mail, somehow, still goes through. But not forever. Because now, as you cross a gently crumbling stretch of road flanked by half-buried milestones and silence thicker than stew, it's time to talk about what happened after. When the horses slowed. When the scrolls stopped. When the system that once connected an empire began to fray. You're riding through the waning days of the Achaemenid postal system. It didn't collapse all at once, of course. Systems this vast rarely do. But after Alexander the Great rolled in with his surprisingly organized army and deep curiosity about infrastructure, things began to change. He admired the Persian system, publicly, even. Historians say he kept many post stations intact during his campaigns, converting them to serve his new empire. But priorities shifted. Routes changed. Messages got tangled in the transfer of power. You pass a broken post hut, its roof gone, its walls overtaken by vine and thyme. A scroll lies half buried near the threshold, rotted through but still wrapped in faded blue twine. You dismount. Brush it gently. Someone tried. Even at the end, someone tried. Mainstream historians note that under the Seleucids, and later the Parthians, portions of the system remained. Some stations were restored. Others were rebranded. The Parthians added their own flair, longer distances, fewer stops, more reliance on fast riders and tough horses. But it was never quite the same. Fringe tales suggest a few hardcore chapars refused to quit. They kept riding, unpaid and unrecognized, simply because they believed in the message. One story tells of a rider who continued to deliver scrolls decades after the empire fell, unaware that his recipients had become Roman governors. You find a weathered marker carved with both a Zoroastrian symbol and a Greek inscription. The stone's cracked, half swallowed by weeds. You pause to light a small fire beside it, the way old riders did when commemorating a colleague lost on the road. Because even if the empire forgot, you remember. You ride on, now passing through towns where no one looks up as you pass. No stable boys wave. No stew waits. Just wind, sun, and the quiet decay of once great logistics. But the influence of the system? It lingers. Later empires borrowed from it, Romans, Byzantines, even Islamic caliphates. They studied the routes. Rebuilt where it made sense. The idea that a message could move faster than the sender never truly died. Even today, some of those old roads still exist, carved into hillsides, hiding beneath modern highways, or used as rural footpaths by shepherds who have no idea they're walking on ancient postal lanes. You imagine a rider, centuries from now, discovering your scroll in a ruined post hut. Holding it like treasure. Delivering it anyway. Because the scroll, like the system, wasn't just about communication. It was about connection. And though the empire fell, the roads remember. The final stretch is quiet. The kind of quiet that hums gently in your ears, reminding you not just of how far you've come, but of how far every scroll once traveled. No fanfare. No horns. Just hoofbeats, breath, and the road still underfoot. You're nearing Persepolis, or at least what's left of it. The air changes. Thinner. Drier. The scent of old stone and fig trees. And the road? It widens, smooths out like it remembers how important it used to be. You slow your horse. No need to rush now. This was the heart of the empire. The place where messages ended. Where the king's court listened, recorded, and responded. And though much of it is now just columns and stories, you can almost hear it, scribes scratching on parchment, sandals echoing in corridors, scrolls being handed off, sealed, archived. You pass under a crumbled gate once flanked by statues of winged bulls. Even broken, they look like they're watching. Maybe they are. You dismount for the last time. Your legs wobble like they've forgotten how to ground themselves. You hand off the final scroll, this one bearing a seal you don't recognize. Maybe it's ceremonial. Maybe it's real. Either way, it disappears into the folds of a waiting official's robe. No thanks. No flourish. Just another message delivered. You wander through the old station, now just ruins. The pillars still cast long shadows. You find a stone bench and sit, tracing a groove worn by 1,000 riders who sat here before you. Some tired. Some triumphant. All part of the same relay. And you realize something soft and certain. It wasn't the roads alone. Or the horses. Or the scrolls. It was the rhythm. The steady, stitched pattern of riders moving through dust, delivering meaning, one breath at a time. Mainstream scholars sometimes call the Persian postal system an early bureaucratic miracle. But to you, it feels more like a heartbeat. One that pulsed across mountains and deserts and rivers, tying a sprawling empire together without a single raised voice. And it still echoes now, in ways no one expected. Fringe legends speak of a final scroll. The last one delivered before the system dissolved. It wasn't an order or a warning. It was a poem. Just 4 lines about stars, silence, and the way horses remember paths long after people forget. You look up at the sky. The stars are out. You let your breath slow. You feel the earth still beneath you. And you listen, not for hoofbeats now, but for memory. For the weight of messages carried across time. And for the road that, even in silence, always leads you home. And now, let the saddle slip from your shoulders. Let the reins loosen. Let the road fade into dusk. You've journeyed far, through heat and hush, ruins and rhythm, on a ride that wasn't just about distance, but about connection. About messages that mattered, and people who carried them even when no one was watching. You've galloped beside kings and couriers, through deserts that whispered and cities that remembered. You've seen how an empire spoke to itself. Not with shouts, but with steady scrolls. You felt the hooves beneath you, the dust in your throat, the scrolls pressed close to your heart. But now, there's no more to carry. The fire at the station glows low. The road behind you curls into shadow. And the message? It's delivered. Let your eyes soften. Let your breath slow, sinking with the distant echo of hoofbeats across sand. Let the weight of the journey lift, replaced with stillness, with peace, with the hush that follows a message received. You've ridden far. You've done well. The empire sleeps. The scrolls rest. And now, so can you.